Oh. I guess we're on the air. Google. Let's see. I need to get this so I could see you a little bit while I'm reading the script. Alright, let's give this a try. Good morning, Bitcoins, and welcome to a very special episode of MadBitcoins. This is MadBitcoins Live. We have a very special treat for you tonight here at MadBitcoins, an interview with Davi Barker, one of the founders of the Hoodies for Homeless campaign and Bitcoins Not Bombs. Davi, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. This is being broadcast live on Google Hangouts and will be archived forever on YouTube, unless I figure out how to download it and edit it, which is quite likely. Be alerted next time we do this by adding MadBitcoins to your circles on Google+. Yeah, I know, I don't use Google Plus for anything either, but it's ubiquitous and really good with video. If I'd promoted this properly, you could even be watching it live and adding in questions and comments like a true interactive television experience. But for now, let's worry about those complications next time. So, Davi, how did you come up with the idea for Hoodies for Homeless?
Well, I've been volunteering with a group called Project Feed for probably 4 or 5 years, and what they do is they distribute bag lunches in San Francisco. And a couple of years ago, we decided that we would actually survey, we call them clients because we don't want to stigmatize anybody and we don't refuse a lunch to anybody, so we call them clients. And so we decided to ask our clients what they wanted, and we were expecting feedback like, you know, they prefer grape jelly to strawberry jelly, or they prefer granola bars to potato chips, or something like that. But what they actually told us was that they don't need food. That at least in San Francisco, there's so much, there's so many meal programs, there's so many people doing free lunches the way that we were doing, that it's very difficult to go hungry in San Francisco. But what they do need is warm clothes, because even though it's California, San Francisco is actually very cold because it has the water on 3 sides. So I've been trying to do this pretty much since then, and I pitched this to the Occupy movement, and I've pitched this to a number of other organizations, and there's always a lot of enthusiasm but not a lot of follow-through. So I decided that the Bitcoin community was the one who I was going to pitch this to, and I was going to do it myself.
Excellent. And how much have you raised so far?
Well, the Bitcoin starter is currently about 8.2 Bitcoin. And we've also received about 2.4 Bitcoin in general donations to Bitcoin Not Bombs. So, you know, what's that, 10.6? 10.6 is roughly $1,300 right now, so that's pretty good.
That's excellent. That's all from individual donors. Have you had any interest from the Bitcoin corporations?
So I send out a massive press release. That's something that we do as Bitcoin Not Bombs, is we maintain a sort of email list of writers at various media platforms that we know write about Bitcoin, or people who are the heads of organizations that we know deal in Bitcoin. So I have a pretty extensive list that I send out a general announcement whenever we launch a new campaign. But at the same time, I don't know who the donors are. So we've had a number of fairly large donations. I think the largest was 2 full Bitcoin. And I don't know where those come from. So it's possible those are coming from those sorts of large groups, but I haven't had any feedback from them.
Well, I think I do have a spoiler alert on that 2 Bitcoins. I believe it was donated by Andreas Antonopoulos from Let's Talk Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah?
I noticed it on his Twitter.
Now, how do you know that? Oh, Twitter, okay.
Oh, Twitter. He was counting down the blockchain. He had some kind of Twitter way of monitoring when his transactions would be sent through, and he was watching it like a pot boiling. So I knew it was an exciting moment, and 2 Bitcoins is certainly an exciting donation. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
But is there any way the companies like Coinbase or BitPay or even Magic the Gathering online exchange, could they buy a sponsorship on the back of the shirts?
So we haven't announced what the back of the shirt is going to be yet. There is a possibility of doing sponsor shirts. We did that with the free aid donation campaign. But at this point, it kind of looks like we could do an entirely grassroots funded thing. So it's not, we wouldn't turn away the money if somebody wanted to sponsor something like that. But we also have some other sort of fun ideas for things we're going to put on the back. So it's still kind of up in the air.
Certainly, because my idea would be like a 5K shirt where every company could have a little square and we could kind
Yeah.
of show the entire Bitcoin corporate community backing a positive project like this.
That's what we did with, actually, that's the shirt I'm wearing. These were the shirts that we did for the Free Aid, Antiwar.com, and Free State Project campaign, and they did exactly. It's like a 5K run shirt. I have a lot of experience in screen printing, so I've set up a lot of shirts like that before. And I'm not opposed to doing that. We're probably going to continue the campaign beyond the Bitcoin starter, maybe even make it like an annual thing. So if we get that kind of support, then we'll do something like that.
Maybe we could even start a 5K for Bitcoin for charity, some kind of a race.
A race? Yeah, that'd be neat.
San Francisco's fun, you know, beta breakers, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if we could hitch some sort of a fundraiser to beta breakers, like if we could have sponsored runners or something like that, that'd be kind of fun.
A whole crew dressed in orange. I'd like to see it. So,
yeah.
So what kind of message did you want to put on the back of the shirt? Like information about Bitcoin or?
So the primary thing that I want, and this is sort of a secondary purpose of the whole campaign, is general information about Bitcoin, and that's partially because I think people like in sort of commons need to be familiarized with it, and it's also because I think it is potentially a powerful tool for homeless people themselves if they could make use of something like Coindesk text messaging app or something like that. Then it's potentially a source of income for them, and so part of the mission is to do outreach to that community and see if there is a potential in that.
Certainly, I read the recent Wired article, and they said that they were clicking a smartphone app to get Bitcoin as well as watching videos to get Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. It sounded like very small amounts of Bitcoin, but somehow in the end they got a pizza. So.
Yeah, there was an organization named in that article called the Tenderloin Technology Lab, and that, like, coincidentally is literally like 2 blocks away from where Project Feed will be doing the distributing. So I did reach out to them, I emailed them, I sent them the press release and everything, and hopefully there's an avenue for collaborating with them, but I haven't heard back yet.
Certainly, and the idea would be that Project Feed would deliver the hoodies to the clients directly?
Yeah, so Project Feed meets up once a month, and we'll do between 500 and 2,000 lunches, depending on the kind of donations that month. And then it's literally dozens of volunteers. So it's like assembly line, construction of sandwiches, and assembling of lunch bags. And then teams will go out with boxes and distribute them in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. So we'll probably use that same distribution network, especially because that way there'll be people that we know that know us, that have seen us month to month. You know what I mean? Like there are regulars who are there looking for us anyway. So.
Sure, not just some random guys handing out orange hoodies on the street.
Right.
Sounds kind of like a Sean's Outpost of the West Coast.
Yeah, you know, that is a very flattering comparison. I am humbled by Jason King. He's been at this a little longer than I have, and the Satoshi Forest and the projects that he's doing, I aspire to that. So if there is a potential to be some sort of Sean's Outpost West, you know, there's some room to grow into that.
It's definitely exciting stuff coming out from them, and truly a great tribute to his friend Sean that passed away.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that Bitcoin Not Bombs has been working on lately?
Well, we're just sort of generally a promotions company, so there are kind of sort of drips and drabs of work here and there. The main other project we're working on is something that I pitched at the Porcupine Freedom Festival a few months ago, and it's the idea of a renegade psychological experiment on authority. And so the idea
that sounds dangerous, like wearing one of those cop block badges in public.
Well, the cop block badges are a renegade psychological experiment on authority, but we're imagining something a little more formal. The logic behind it is that experiments like the Milgram experiment and the Stanford Prison experiment have sort of dramatically changed the way that people think about authority and think about obedience to authority, but they can't really be repeated. After those results were found, the APA changed the ethical guidelines for psychological experiments, and made it very difficult to study obedience and authority. And so our thinking is that the APA does not actually pass laws. The APA writes guidelines that affect things like public funding. Well, we're not. I mean, public funding, federal grants never come in Bitcoin anyway. So, we're not interested in public funding, which means that we wouldn't be limited by those guidelines necessarily. And so it's possible for us to conduct our own psychological experiments. And the one that we're considering, the one that we're drafting right now, is on police brutality. But there's also, that police badge is itself a kind of experiment, because you'll see. I don't know if you've ever got one, but if you walk around, people do react to them in a very strange way, because at first blush they do look like a police badge, but they're clearly not if you get close enough.
Absolutely. I mean, I thought about getting one and wearing it around, but I just know I'm going to get into trouble. So
we haven't had any reports of anybody getting in trouble. I suppose that's a possibility. I think it's sort of arbitrary. We're sort of careful on the site. This is from shinybadges.com or copblock.org, and there are statements on the site that say to be careful not to look like a police officer, that they're intended as satire and they're not. Because you're threatening people. If you look like a police officer, you're threatening people. Really? and so there haven't been any incidents yet. I know that Pete and some of the other sort of cop blockers have interacted with police and shown them to police, and they haven't had any problems. So I'm hoping nothing happens. But there's a potential there, I suppose.
I mean, there's probably room for an interesting journalist type piece to go out there, like the journalists that put on the fat suits and saw how people reacted to them differently, and have a journalist just put on the cop badge with your normal outfit and see what happens.
Right. See how you're treated differently.
Yeah, you get some free donuts maybe. Good deal.
I don't know about that. I definitely had the experience. The first day that they came in, I had mine on, and not intentionally, but sort of unintentionally, I had on a jacket that sort of, it was, it looked like it could have been a police jacket. It was that sort of a style. It didn't have any insignias on it or anything, but it was a black jacket, and I was wearing black pants. And I had a guy ride his bike, he was coming up behind me, and he offered to sell me some, I think it was marijuana. I wasn't really, hip to the slang. Yeah. And then he, saw it, and he just veered off, didn't wait for me to answer or anything. And so I felt...
It keeps the listeners away, right?
I felt bad. I felt like I'd threatened him. I didn't mean to. But that's sort of it did have this sort of unintended effect of intimidating this person. Right.
Well, it's funny how powerful clothing can be. I mean, yeah. I've recently switched to wearing a suit here, and I think I look much more professional. But I bought all this at a thrift store.
Sure.
This is, nothing fancy. And then the same thing for Russell Brand, who was recently talking about Hugo Boss, who designed the Nazi uniforms, and no one wants to remember that.
But, well, don't underestimate the top hat. I've sported a top hat before, and it commands quite a bit of authority.
Oh, yeah. You walk into a room with this thing, you're going to clear it out. But I read something about this guy online who had a kind of a big red top hat as his symbol, and he wore it everywhere. And he said it worked as a detector, so he could tell who the good people are because they'd come talk to him about it, and the bad people would just stay away because no one wants to talk to that weirdo in the hat.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was a really neat article that he did. He probably wore his all the time. I mean, this is just a show thing for me.
I wore mine all the time. I did some impersonations of Emperor Norton, who's sort of a local historical celebrity in San Francisco. He was alive in the 1880s, but I sort of put on the Civil War uniform and the top hat with the big purple feather, and I used to walk around San Francisco making proclamations. And yeah, you could totally tell. People who knew who it was, they were thrilled. They wanted to have their picture taken with me. They wanted to do street sketches and stuff of me and whatever. And they got the joke. They got the character. And I met a lot of really fun people that way. And other people, it's not part of their reality, and so it's invisible. They'll pretend it doesn't exist.
Absolutely. Yeah, Emperor Norton's an interesting character. I believe he owned the Bay Bridge, or might have claimed access to it at one point.
Oh, he wrote the proclamation to have it built. And so when they built it, they dedicated it to him.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So there's petitions now to have it renamed. the Emperor Norton Bridge. But what's funny about that is that he ordered it named the James Joyce Bridge. So it's sort of it's like honoring him by disobeying him if you call it the Emperor Norton Bridge.
And you can't disobey the emperor. You got to go with what he says. So we should honor James Joyce, I guess. I mean,
yeah, Emperor Norton is also a really interesting figure when it comes to monetary history, because one of the things that made him famous was that he issued his own currency, and it was accepted all throughout San Francisco. And say what you will about monetary policies of paper money, but an Emperor Norton dollar is worth a heck of a lot more than a dollar at this point.
Certainly. You just had to wait long enough. If you had a pile of them, you could sell them as historical artifacts. I mean,
right.
That's pretty great.
So I do think of him as a kind of mascot of, I guess, private currency, competing currencies.
That would be nice if we could get him up to more of a national, global level, kind of Emperor Norton with Bitcoin, not just a San Francisco hero.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible. The orange definitely correlates. There's a lot of orange in the artwork associated with Emperor Norton, so it's a possibility.
Well, and maybe we could get a whole crew of people to dress up as Emperor Norton and meet up at a pub in San Francisco and kind of have a Spartacus thing. I am Emperor Norton. No, I am Emperor Norton.
Sure. We should start the rumor that Satoshi Nakamoto is actually Emperor Norton.
Like a Highlander thing. He just keeps coming back and coming back.
Yeah. Or maybe he's a descendant of Emperor Norton. That's why Emperor Norton disappeared, is because he fled to Japan, where he set up a sort of a life for himself, and then no, this doesn't work, does it?
Oh, it works pretty good until Satoshi Nakamoto gets a sword and starts chopping off people's heads. It's pretty good until that, like the whole quickening issue. But other than that, he's very, very likable. All right, so about how many days remaining in the Bitcoin starter campaign?
I think, let me hang on. I have the window open here. We have 11 days left on Bitcoin Starter, and we're going to continue to accept T-shirt sales for a while after that.
And the T-shirt funding also goes into the Hoodies for Homeless Fund?
Yeah, if you go to bitcoin.bombs.com, or if you go to shinybadges.com, it's at the top of that site too. You can it's an orange T-shirt. It'll be printed with the same bomber logo as the hoodie, and they're priced so that every sale of one T-shirt also pays for one hoodie. So even after the Bitcoin starter, we're going to continue to raise funds that way. We'll probably even continue it throughout the winter. I mean, there's no reason not to continue if it continues to raise funds. And then on top of that, we're sort of thinking that this will be like our Toys for Tots. Like every winter, we'll probably do a campaign similar to this, and it'll kind of be like Bitcoin Not Bombs' winter campaign.
That would be excellent. I know Penny Arcade, the popular web comic about video games, has had incredible success with their Child's Play campaign. They raise money to buy video games for children in children's hospitals. And it's it started out as a way to say video games aren't just for violence, and people can enjoy Game Boys and that kind of thing. And then now it's really taken off. They do a whole charity dinner, and they have a silent auction, and as well as taking donations online. So,
that'd be cool.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing. They've done it. I mean, quite a few years now, and it's like a real charity now. They have to hire people to run it, and it's just quite a neat thing for the video game / web comic community.
Oh, maybe we could host some sort of an event. There
we go. Got to keep expanding it. We can grow on this thing.
Well, I mean, for us, we're in the Silicon Valley, so so there would definitely be a lot of Bitcoiners in the area, but even if they weren't Bitcoiners, there would be a lot of tech people in the area. So that's sort of fertile ground for outreach on information on Bitcoin. So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of possibilities. We're going to keep at it. But right now, it's like we've got 324 hoodies to purchase. So that's sort of goal number one.
Well, and it'll be really interesting to see the impact of 300 homeless people wearing the orange sweatshirts that talk about Bitcoin. I mean, they're little ambassadors now, kind of, for Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's sort of interesting because they might not be able to answer questions. If somebody saw it and they're like, "Hey, I've been seeing this everywhere. What is that?" They might not. They might not know.
Well, as long as there's some information on the back of the shirt, send them to the right address, get them going on the Bitcoin. So.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that some of them will stick around and kind of have conversations with us too, because they're people too, and there's a sort of passive attitude about some charity where they want to give stuff away and then not interact with the people at all and not think of them as people at all. And I really like the idea of interacting with them and learning their names. And this was the reason for Project Feed to go out there and talk to them in the first place, was to learn about them as people. So, hopefully there's something fruitful there.
Certainly. I mean, and if Bitcoins continue going up in value, if they had $10, $20 in an account and they just left it there,
yeah,
it could be worth a lot more someday.
I'm kind of the Jeffrey Tucker school on the value of Bitcoin. He says that it's either going to zero or it's going to hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there really is nowhere in between. Like it's either going to become totally worthless and not succeed as a currency, or if it succeeds as a currency, then it's going global, and you have to think of what does 21 million units look like as a global economy, right? So.
Wow, hundreds of thousands. I hadn't thought that high. I was thinking in the $1,000 range,
Well, think about it. If Bitcoin became the dominant currency in the world, right, and it replaced state currencies, there are only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin, right? So that means that the entire global economy will be represented by 21 million units. Then they're infinitely divisible, so that's not a problem as far as transactions is concerned. But you have to think about what does the exchange rate of Bitcoin to commodities become at that point, right? Because there's billions and trillions of dollars in the economy. Like the dollar is based on the U.S. economy versus the trillions of dollars that exist. Well, Bitcoins will never exceed 21 million. So that's the ratio you have to think about if it were to succeed.
Well, it certainly feels like it's succeeding now. For me, it's all about the venture capitalists putting their money in, and that kind of backs up the faith of the Bitcoiners.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of like it's backed by whatever commodities and products and services exist in the Bitcoin economy. So every time a new person adopts the use of Bitcoin, whatever they're selling enters the pool of resources that lends value to Bitcoin itself.
Awesome.
Does that make sense? So like Shiny Badges, for example, takes Bitcoin, and I have from the beginning, and I'm hoping to actually stop taking dollars at some point. But that means that all of the value that is represented by the transactions that go through Shiny Badges, that's a material in the Bitcoin economy, right? Like that's the physical commodity that's behind the Bitcoins that I'm accepting as payments.
And the more and more products that are sold with Bitcoins, the more and more value that the Bitcoins have.
Right.
Excellent. Anything else that you'd like to add?
I mean, I could talk about Bitcoin all day. Yeah, I mean, I'm just really excited about it. I'm excited about the freedom of it. I'm excited that that it represents something really like dramatically different than any other currency in the world. Like every other currency in the world for the last few hundred years at least has been an inflationary currency. We've all grown up, and our parents and grandparents have grown up in economies where their wages are worth less and less, and their prices go up and up. And Bitcoin flips that on its head, and so it completely changes the sort of economic calculations that people do when it comes to investment, when it comes to sort of like planning their economic future, because you can kind of guess. I mean, it's not certain, but like the trend has been that the currency will go up and up in value, which means that the prices of things will come further down, right? And that's like the opposite of what generations of people have experienced and what has impoverished generations of people. So I really think it's a game changer in economics in a way that we haven't really seen the ramifications of yet.
It definitely brings back the idea of savings. A lot of people don't even keep a savings, they just keep an investment account because the market is moving so much faster than like your average savings account. But if you had a Bitcoin savings account, you're finally able to take advantage of some of that market force.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think
it's also kind of just passive. Like, when I first started accepting Bitcoin, I didn't know what it was. Like, I had a client who decided that he was getting off of the dollar and that if I wanted to continue to work for him, he was going to pay me in Bitcoin. And I was like, okay, fine, show me how this works. I've heard about this on the radio. That's fine. It was like such a small amount of income for me that it wasn't really much of a risk. Sure. And so I decided to keep doing work with him. So I opened a wallet, and it just sort of started trickling in little bits and pieces at a time. And then before you know it, there were like, 10, 20 Bitcoin in this wallet, and I didn't have any sense of what that was worth. And at the time, that wasn't worth very much. Sure. But suddenly it was,
That's what's neat about the Life on Bitcoin movie. I've seen a recent YouTube that they released, and they go to a farmer's market. And they have an incredible amount of success convincing the individual vendors to accept Bitcoin. And I mean, none of them really know what Bitcoin is or have a plan on how they're going to spend it. So I see all of those farmers just keeping a few Bitcoins in their account, and who knows what the future's going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, the little smoothie that they sell to the Life on Bitcoin girl, that could be worth $100 in a few years.
Well, this is what got my family interested is when Casasious coins first came out, the physical Bitcoins first came out, and they were about $3. I included them as like stocking stuffers. I gave one to every member of my family with whatever else I was giving them. Sure. And I thought of it as a kind of a throwaway, like it was like an outreach thing. It's like, here's something I'm interested in, and here's a piece of metal, so you know what I'm talking about. And I found out my brother was sort of interested in it because he's sort of a gamer and he kind of understands like market simulations in video games. But then, like, you tell them a year or two later, oh yeah, by the way, that coin you're holding on to sold for like $500 on eBay, and it's like, oh, wait a minute.
Well, it's just the opposite of almost anything else that you buy, where it goes down in value, it breaks down. If you hold on to this, it actually goes up in value.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't have predicted that, but it's still like it gets people's attention.
Yeah, it looks so easy now. I mean, I wish I'd been, heavy into Bitcoin even just a year ago, giving these things out, creating magical instant wealth for new people. But the reality is we don't know the future from right now. We could be doing that today. I mean, I get donations for like 25 cents. That could be $25 in a few years.
Yeah, I try to keep the long view of it. Like I try, and the investors will say this, like large investors that invest in like the stock market and sort of watch the little machinations in the listings, they'll advise this too, that you shouldn't panic about the short-term changes and the short-term sort of spikes and crashes, but sort of come up with what you believe is the long-term of the thing, and then not worry about the bumps in the road, right? Like if you're still convinced that it's a good long-term investment and it's a good long-term tool, then you should continue to use it. And I am. I'm convinced that if not Bitcoin, it will be something very much like Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is going to be a transitional form, if not the future of money. So
that's the neat thing about Bitcoin compared to like other currencies, is that the Bitcoin spec is actually changing. Like they can add things to Bitcoin, they can improve Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And it could be even not today's Bitcoin that succeeds, but tomorrow's and the next innovations added to the thing.
Yeah. The other thing is, even if it's an altcoin, right? Like even if it's Litecoin or Ripple or something comes down the road 20 years from now that for some reason is superior, that new currency is going to have a hurdle of being easy to exchange with Bitcoin, right? Like that's going to be a feature that currency is going to have, whereas the dollar doesn't have to have that feature. The dollar is actually invested in being resistant to being exchangeable. But anything that comes from now on forever and ever is going to have to design itself to be easy to exchange.
It's amazing to compare Bitcoin to cash. I mean, you can really send it to anyone like it's an email going to an email address, and cash it's so hard to send, so hard to carry, especially larger amounts.
Yeah. I have clients overseas, and I have, so this is sort of like really typifies it. So I have a client in Tokyo that I send Bitcoin to. He takes Bitcoin. It's very easy. You know, it's like he messages me on Facebook. I say, "Oh, here it comes." He says, "Oh, there it is," and that's it, right?
Awesome.
So I have another client in I don't even know where it is. It's somewhere in China. What is that? Probably Hong Kong. But we had the recent problem where they wanted dollars, and there was all this paperwork I had to fill out to associate an account with them so that they could deduct and blah blah blah. It's very difficult to wire money overseas. Well, one of our transactions flagged my bank's fraud alert, and so it rejected the transaction on their end. The bank calls me and says, "Hey, did you really make this transaction?" And I actually said no at first because I didn't make the, because they said, "Did you make this purchase for $250 today?" And I thought through my day, my physical day, and I'm like, "No, I didn't buy anything for $250," because I didn't realize that the transaction was occurring online and it was taking place overseas. So I said, "Yeah, I didn't make that transaction." And then I look into it, and I realized I did. So I call the bank back. I say, "I did make this transaction." And by then, it's too late. Your debit card has been frozen. Your card has been canceled. We've issued you a new card. We've canceled that transaction. You've got to now get in touch with your client and tell them to run the transaction again. And it's like, I appreciate the fraud alert, but this is all this is all a product of dealing with this bank that is not a party to the transaction.
Well, and they have so many ways now of confirming that it's actually you. I mean, if the bank would use a Google Authenticator, which creates a random key that identifies you as having your cell phone, so we can pretty much assume that it's you.
Yeah.
They could be a lot more, and especially now with the new thumbprint reader on the iPhone 5S, they can really be sure that it's you, and they don't have as much reason to do all the chargebacks, at least until those systems are broken.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's what I talked to an international shipper, and he talked about Bitcoin. And basically, if you're overseas and you want to buy something with Bitcoin, once you've sent the Bitcoins, you've bought the thing. That's it.
Yeah. Well, it's just like cash. As soon as it leaves your hand, it's over.
Yep. Well, excellent interview. There's 10 days left in the Bitcoin Starter campaign. It's over at Bitcoin Starter, and you can check them out at bitcoinnotbombs.com. And now this is where you come in, the audience. We need you to donate Bitcoins for Hoodies for Homeless to show that Bitcoin can do some good and give back to the community. Please consider donating, even a few bits, because I'd just like to see that donor number go up. Also, even if you don't have a lot of Bitcoins, please consider writing an email to a Bitcoin company, telling them about the fundraiser and asking them to donate or purchase a corporate sponsorship. Their name could be on the back of the shirt. Heck, if you've got 10 Bitcoins, it could be your name on the back of the shirt. It could even say MadBitcoins if you'd like to donate a sponsorship. Anyway, I'd like to extend a very special MadBitcoins thank you to Davi Barker for being our first guest ever on the first ever live MadBitcoins. So thank you, Davi.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure we'll do more of these in the future. But until next time, this has been Mad Bitcoins. Mad Bitcoins. Mad Bitcoins. And now I'm going to push the stop button on Google Hangouts. And we'll see what happens. So hold on.